Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second part of the Global Collaboration webinar series of ASABE, Tools and Technologies for Global Collaboration in Agricultural and Biological Engineering. My name is Rania Buenavista, and I'll be co-hosting this webinar with Rosel Barreto, who is our current YPC Global Engagement Representative. So Rosel, could you tell us more about YPC and this webinar series? You're muted.
Sorry about that. So let me start. YPC basically stands for Young Professionals Community. We are a group of early career professionals whose goal is mainly to provide relevant information for professionals in their early career stage or graduate school. We host several events throughout the year that include networking, professional development, and different training. As for this global collaboration series, we have identified the gap that young professionals face in terms of collaborating with various professionals in different fields. So we want them to give them a head start about what are the expectations, what are the requirements, and the process that collaboration or global collaboration entail in general.
Thank you, Rosel. So now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Lila Carden. Dr. Carden is an Associate Professor of Technology Project Management in the Construction Management Department in the Cullen College of Engineering, Technology Division at the University of Houston. She received her PhD in Human Resource Development from Texas A&M University. She worked in industry as a project manager, project lead, account representative, volume analyst, and auditor. She also worked for approximately 18 years in various academic settings at various institutions. In addition to the University of Houston, are Texas A&M University, Houston Baptist University, and University of Houston Downtown. She is also a certified project management professional through the Project Management Institute. Dr. Carden's research focuses on the use of projects and project management processes to support the implementation of strategic initiatives, including the impact of human resource management and risk management. She is also the co-editor of the book entitled Intelligent Automation: Bridging the Gap Between Business and Academia. She has also published in international journals such as the Project Management Journal, International Journal of Project Management, International Journal of Information Technology Project Management, Personal Review, Human Resource Development Review, and Human Resource Development International. So with that, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Lila for her presentation.
Hello, and thank you all for this wonderful opportunity to be able to speak to you all about projects and project management. Again, I had such a great introduction. I do not need to identify myself and my current work profession. And so we'll just jump into the presentation. So the agenda for today is we're going to talk a little bit about projects, try to identify what is a project, also give examples of project topics. And I'd like for your participation to also share with your experiences about projects. I'm going to define what project management is, take a look at the history of project management, identify how Project Management Institute using PMBOK methodology talks about the phases that a project should go through for implementation. Then we're going to review a little bit about the techniques and the deliverables and tools that's associated with each of the phases, use an example sustainable project to demonstrate some tools, and then we'll conclude with just a reference slide. So when we talk about project management, there's just some specific, or just projects in general, there's some specific types of things to help identify if what you are looking at is really a project. So you'd have a specific objective with a designated time, which would begin date and an end date. You usually may have some funding limitations, such as the budget and the resources and the people that are part of the project. Okay, and then most of the time projects cross various functions or various operations to pull people together as a part of a team. So now I'd like for your participation. Here are some examples of some project topics that I understand a lot of you all involved in, like renewable energy, sustainable energy. And so I'd like for you all to participate, I think, by putting examples of topics or projects that you've experienced or worked on in the chat. And then I'll ask for some assistance from the Irania, I think it is, that will actually talk about some example projects. Okay, keeping in mind projects, again, the attributes that I just shared with you in the earlier slide. So we'll pause right now for your participation. Okay, so if we don't have any examples from you all in the audience, these are some that's included on the screen, like implementing biomass crops for electricity using
Dr.
onshore.
Carden.
Yes.
We have a couple of
Oh, okay, great.
projects here.
Fantastic. Uh-huh. Sure.
We'll see. We have optimization of pulse protein extraction,
Good.
optimization of hemp protein extraction and modification for bio-based adhesive production,
Great.
optimizing the wastewater infrastructure to enhance flood resilience, and
Great.
then optimization of the methodologies used for bioplastics production.
Fantastic. All of those are example projects. And so thank you so much for your participation and from sharing. So now we have a good understanding about what a project is or project topics. Let's go into what is project management. Well, it's nothing more than the knowledge, the skills, the tools and techniques that's used to execute these activities that ends up with a deliverable. And that deliverable, as we looked at from the topics, could just be anything from an implementation of a certain type of product, or it could just be a report, or it could be an implementation of some type of tool that can be used for sustainability. So just a little bit of history about project management. Project management was a part of I used it for my dissertation to survey some project managers. And at that time, my chair, who is the co-author of the paper that I've publications I've identified here, and it's also in the reference, we looked at a little bit of the history of project management, and basically began around the 1900s just to plan and manage projects. And then as time evolved around about the 1950s, then the idea was, well, let's start looking at some type of tools that you can use to help to plan and monitor to manage the project, which was like project planning, which included PERT and CPM. Those are just kind of like charts or documents that you can use to help monitor control projects. And then around about in between the 60s and a little bit of the 80s, they start thinking about these human resource aspects that help with the success and the implementation of the project, saying that maybe the project managers need to have some qualifications, hence certification. You may need to have a project team to help support you as a part of resources that are allocated to the project. And then around about the 1800s and the 1900s on, start looking at the outcomes of these projects and what are some of the deliverables that's associated with it, which could be some increasing PM competencies or looking at the communication and negotiation and the collaboration aspects of it. And so again, throughout time, project management has evolved to include various resources, which definitely would, as we will talk more about in this presentation, can use the tools and the techniques. So what is foundational for the courses that I teach, and also that was a part of my certification, because I'm a project management professional that's certified by the Project Management Institute, then there's phases or life cycles that projects should go through prior to, from initiation until full implementation. And these phases include initiation, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. And so we're going to talk a little bit about these phases in more details with the next of the few slides. And so with these slides, in addition to talking about the phases, which I want you to see that's on the right, and it has project phases. But on to the left, you also notice that there's like some deliverables and tools that can be associated with some of these project phases. So the first phase is initiation, and that's when you mainly start thinking about what's the purpose of my project? What are we trying to achieve? What are going to be some of the success factors? And then looking to see what resources, whether they're human or non-human resources, that's going to help you with the implementation. And so some of the tools that you can use is a project charter. And I'll go through some of the items in a project charter with an example project in just a few moments. And then I want for all of the phases, for everyone to be aware, which I'm sure you are, there's certain collaboration tools that you can use that can help people come together virtually or face-to-face, or you can even have a hybrid association with using these tools. And one of them is Microsoft Teams. It is a platform is just similar to Zoom, but it is a Microsoft solution. And later on in the presentation, I will share with you a tool, Microsoft Project, that I've used and that we teach in the program to help to document the task and monitor and control a project. So then you move from initiation, once you figure out what's your scope of your project, what you're trying to achieve, to planning. And in the planning stage, that's when you're going to document your task and your activities. And I have an example of that a little bit later, which then you want to consider, who do you need to communicate with? If you have these different people coming from different groups and different departments that are resources for the project, how are you going to communicate with them about their task, the status of their task, and then the completion of the task? And then as a part of looking at projects, you want to try to identify those things, risks that can impede or cause the project not to be delivered on time. And examples of risk could be like you don't have enough resources to complete the task, or those resources don't have enough skills, or you're constrained by certain budgetary requirements that it can impose limitations on what resources that you can use. And as a result of that planning phase, you'll end up with a charter, which I will explain to you a little bit later, a project plan. You'll use a tool called Microsoft Project. And as I stated earlier, always using Microsoft Teams as a collaborative tool. Then the last three phases of the project lifecycle is execution, monitor, control, and closing. For execution, that's where you're going to actually execute the task or activities to help you complete the project. A tool, again, that you look on the right-hand side that we'll discuss later is Microsoft Project. It'll allow you to be able to identify all these tasks, assign resources, assign dates. We'll have an example soon. Then you're dealing with people that are coming from various departments and business units. So you need to be able to determine how you're going to communicate with them. And we'll talk a little bit about that later, meaning what's the medium? Will you use email, or will you use a collaborative tool, or will you talk with them with using project status reports? Monitoring, controlling, again, that's mainly the people that are leading the project. Project manager is usually the one that's assigned the role to lead the project, as well as sometimes you can have project co-leads, and that's someone to assist the project manager. So again, the tools that the project manager will use to be able to monitor and control the status of those tasks. And then closing. Closing is basically when you say, hey, I finished the project, here's the product, here's the deliverable. Okay, and you also want to think about if there's some contracts, or if you did not have resources to have the skill sets and you had to contract out and have others to help you, there could be some obligations to pay those people. That's a part of your closing. And then you want to conduct what's called a lessons learned. And that's where you sit back as a project team and talk about, Bailey, what you did bad, what you did good, and what you think you need to change and modify if you have similar projects in the future. And so again, you're going to end up with some type of product or deliverable, and it could be just a report, or it could be a website, okay, or it could be a product. Now, let's talk a little bit more about these tools. And the way we're going to do that is give you an example of a sustainable project. All right. This project is about ABC institution, and they have three things they're trying to achieve with this project. And we'll look at the current state of what they're doing with sustainability initiatives. They want to identify future projects that will help promote sustainability. And then they want to develop a plan for promoting sustainability practices. And so what it's in scope, what's currently going on at this institution are things like that's a part of looking at these activities. It's to assess what's going on currently and to think about the future is the natural ecosystem, such as the landscape, the water. We're going to look to see what's going on with transportation. You know, do you have a climate friendly way of transporting people around, maybe on buses and things? The food, is it eco-friendly? Green construction, alternative energy and green technologies. And then to identify any other events currently or in the future that you are promoting or going to want to implement that's related to sustainability. Now, one of the documents that we talked about earlier, which was a tool, was a project charter. And in the project charter, there's various types of information. And I'm at a high level just going to give you examples of what type of information should be included in the charter. The charter is a document that mainly says, okay, we've agreed to do this project. These are the people that are going to help execute the project. This is the time frame, and then this is what we're going to do. A little bit more detail about what's included in that document could be, again, the purpose. So in our example, is develop a sustainability plan. The scope, you're going to look at the sustainability activities that's within the institution. The objectives, again, to look at the current state, develop a vision, and then a plan, okay? And then ultimately, your last deliverable, the last document that you want to have is a sustainability plan. And then the way you're going to look at determining whether this project was successful is to look at to have a sustainability assessment and sustainability plan as an end result of all of your tasks and activities. Also, what's included in the project charter is sometimes the constraints. So what are the things that you need to consider as you execute the sustainability project? Well, you need to look at what's going on in the environment, the community, okay? Do you have certain partners or other corporations that's working with you and partnering with you to make sure that this institution engages in and acts in sustainability and sustainable activities? Also, you want to look at the things that may be dependent on your project, the success or failure. And in this particular example, all of the resources are volunteers. And the project team then would include, as I said, somebody that's kind of like the lead or the manager. And then we have somebody that's going to assist them as the co-lead. And then there are team members that are going to enact these initiatives. So people maybe in operations or renewable energy or natural resources. And then an external consultant that's a volunteer that can sit back and say, hey, let's take a look at this from an outside perspective. And then what's called a project sponsor, someone who's championing the project, someone who said that we're going to implement this project, and someone that's going to be involved. And it's usually at a higher level, somebody from the leadership team that's also going to be able to support it through the implementation. Risk, again, and we talked a little bit about that earlier, and some of these types of risks mainly can be related to, do you have the resources, which could be the people and the money to do what you need to do? Communication plan is used for sharing just the project information, which in turn is the status of the project. Okay, so this is just a ground level of the example of a sustainability project, which is using a project charter. And we talked about some of the items within that charter to help you understand what the project is all about. What's you're going to do, how you're going to do it, the resources that you're going to use to do it, the time frame to do it, and then and particularly the activities. So let's delve into a tool that we talked about earlier. One of the tools that can help you to be able to get your task and your resources and your timeframes all together is called Microsoft Project. It is a software. It is a software, again, Microsoft related product. And this is a screenshot of what's called a project plan. Some people call it a project schedule, but I want to focus in just a little bit on what's included in this plan. Okay, so in our example sustainability project, remember we talked about a project goes through phases. So we have tasks that's listed on initiation, we have tasks that's listed under the planning phase, execution, monitor and control, and then closing. Okay, and so these, for example, let's walk through what's listed on initiation. For most projects, before they get started, you want to identify what are you going to do? So what's the scope? What are you trying to do? In our example, we want to end up with a sustainability plan. Then in initiation, usually determine who's going to be a part of the team that's going to help you to execute the project. One of the documents, the document that's used using PMBOK to say champion to initiate and say it's time to start the project is the charter, which we talked about a little bit earlier. And then as a part of that, you want to obtain authorization for the project charter. That means that sponsor or that leader who has identified that there's a need for this project in the institution. Okay, notice that after we list these particular tasks, and I'm only going to look at initiation right now, that there's a time frame. So you start off saying, how long is it going to take me to identify the scope? What are we going to do on this project? For this example, we're starting in October 1st. And notice that it will go all the way until December the 23rd. Okay. And embedded within those two time frames, the beginning and the end of the project, these are all of these tasks that's going to be used to implement the project. Okay, and all of them will be between the begin date, October 1st, and the end date, December 23rd. Okay, notice also for each of the tasks, looking at the determine the project scope, you have how long it's going to take, in this case, 6 days. You have a begin date of October 1st. You have an end date of October 8th. And all of these activities that's listed on initiation, in this case, is conducted by the project lead. Okay, so that's the individual who's responsible for conducting the project. Also notice that that project lead is going to take care of developing the charter and obtaining approval for the charter. All right. Then for this sustainability project, you get into planning. Planning starts looking at the project charter, the project schedule, the task. Okay. And in this particular project, we're also going to do some research. We're going to look to see what actually is examples of sustainability projects and examples of information that could be included in a sustainability plan. So that's going to require us to do some research and discovery. And that particular task showing here, the number of days it's going to take is 11 days. We're going to start it on November 1. That's after the charter has been signed on October 31st. And then it's going to take us 11 days to be able to conduct that task. Then after that, we're going to think about bringing everybody together and do a kickoff meeting. We're going to prepare for the kickoff meeting. We're going to conduct the kickoff meeting. And then after that, we'll be able to complete our project plan, which is mainly what you see here that's being housed in Microsoft Project. Then you want to execute these tasks. Then you want to, as you execute them, you're going to monitor and control the status of what's going on with those tasks. Were they conducted within the date specified, or did they take a little bit longer? So that's a part of what we call monitoring, control, and tracking. Okay. And again, that's kind of like the project lead's responsibility. And then notice here, once you get through with all of your tasks, you get through with the tracking, then you have some closing activities. You want to deliver the report. excuse me. You want to deliver the report, and then you want to archive any documents that's associated, such as the project charter, the project plan, and then the sustainability plan. So again, notice that within Microsoft Project, you're able to house information. This includes your tasks, the number of days it takes to complete the tasks, the begin and end dates of those tasks, who's responsible for those tasks. Now, there's one other important column that I did not include in here on purpose, because remember, I said for this project, they're volunteers, okay? So if they were not volunteers, then you will have people that you have to assign a cost to, which is mainly considered how much they get paid and the amount of time that's going to take to execute that task. So for a lot of other projects, you have another column there that talks about the cost for each of the individual activities. So I'm going to pause and kind of stop right now and see if you all have any questions about this project plan.
I have one immediate question about it.
Sure.
So the Microsoft project software, is it free? Is it available? Or I know it tells more about the pricing. Is it more like a business tool or an organizational tool?
Yes, you can use it in academia. You can use it in business. It is a tool, and you do need to have a license in order to be able to use it. So you do end up kind of paying a fee for it. That's correct. And so usually now I will also tell you, because you're a student and you're associated with the school, they will give you a rate, a discounted rate. Okay. So good question. Other questions? Now, think about this. If you don't have access to Microsoft Project, you can also take the same type of approach in all of these tasks and put it in Excel. That's another tool that can be used, right? Excel, they have columns, right? Excel allows you to be able to identify begin and end dates. You can put in your resources. Okay, so that is another tool that can be used in lieu of Microsoft Project. But the good news about using Microsoft Project is you can also be able to track. And if you notice here, again, this is for another presentation, like a phase 2, because it gets into a lot of more complicated things. It's that you can have what's called a Gantt chart, which you can help you look to see how long it's going to take for all of the activities and look to see how they overlap. Okay, so that's one of the advantages is using Microsoft Project. It's going to be able to help you be able to better see visuals to identify where you are at a project and where you need to be. Okay, and it'll help you with your reporting process. You can do reports that can kind of just tell you who are the, for example, who are the team members, who are the resources that are on this project, how much do they cost, you know, what's the budget that's associated with it. So you have other reporting features in Microsoft Project that you won't have in Excel that's purely tailored for a particular project. Okay, so good question. Other questions? Any other questions?
I have one more. Are these
Sure.
column names, task name, finish, and dates, predecessors, and then Gantt chart? Are these already in the Microsoft project software?
Predefined, yes, they're already
Built in?
predefined. They're already predefined. And what you do is you can just do like you do in Excel, insert a column, and they'll give you a drop down box. And in the drop down box, you select what's the title of that column. So yes, the predefined. So that's the other reason why you really want to try to see if you can have a project tool, because they could help predefine some of the columns, the task names, and then give you the visuals and the reporting that will help you be able to monitor and control a project. Okay, good question. Other questions? I'll just pause for a few moments.
I have one question here.
Sure.
Is a project charter a separate tool?
Yes, Project Charter is a separate tool. And in the Project Charter, if you'll search, just looking on the internet, you can find some templates for a Project Charter. Okay. And let me go back. This is a very good question. So we make sure you kind of understand. So when I talked about the example sustainability project, Then I said, these are some of the items that's included in a project, where they have templates that'll have little categories to tell you what each of these sections are. And in the project charter, you have what's the purpose of the project. Okay, again, to develop a sustainability plan. What's the scope? You're going to look at sustainability activities. What are the objectives? You're going to assess what's going on with sustainability. You're going to develop a vision and then a plan. And then it'll include what are some of the deliverables. So right here, there's only one deliverable. It's a sustainability plan. And then how are you going to measure success? Well, the success is if you can have this assessment and the plan done within the time frame specified, right? And then what's also sometimes included in the charter, if there are any constraints. So the constraints in this case would be looking at what's going on in the community and the corporations and other partners. Also identifying if they're in the dependencies. Well, in this particular case, you're dependent on people volunteering their time. Okay. And then also it lists who are the resources, the project teams, who are the people that are going to be involved in implementing those tasks that you saw in Microsoft Project. Well, here's some of the people that have to do with sustainability. You have somebody that leads the project that's a co-lead. You have members, okay? These are people that deal with operations, natural resources, renewable energy, that you're going to assign some of these tasks to, okay? And then in some cases, we decide to say in this one, you're going to have an external consultant because you have the community involved and you have people, corporations and other partnerships. And then within that charter, you'll talk about how you're going to share that information. And I'll give you an example of a communication plan shortly. Okay. But very good question. That is, you do the charter first, right? Which includes some of these items. And then it leads you, one of your other major tools is to look at your project plan. What are the tasks that's going to be used that you need to implement to execute this project? Who's going to do it? The time frame's that you're going to do it within. Okay, great question. Other questions? All right. If not, let's move on because I have some other examples of some other tools that I want to share with you all. Okay. Another one is a project status report. Remember when we talked about that you have these tasks that you have to complete? Well, then you need to also sometimes communicate with your team, for example, if those tasks or have not been completed in a timely manner, and you need a way to be able to talk to all the people that's involved to let them know the status of the project. Okay. And so this is an example of a project status report. Again, it's just a Microsoft Word template. Within the template, you have the name of the project, the date, and then you have what's called the status code legend. Okay. Green means everything's on track. Yellow says you got something at risk. This golden colors those risks that are high. And then red means it's off track. So it's kind of like the stoplight, red, yellow, green, more or less. And in it, some of the particular other features of it, it says the overall project status. Okay. Then you can talk about if you're having some issues with the project. For example, since this is a volunteer project, okay, you may have issues with people completing their task on time or people coming to meetings because there's not a definite reward that's really associated other than they want to do pro bono or volunteer work. So that could be an issue. Okay. And then you want to look at things that you've accomplished, okay, which are called like milestones. So, for example, when you complete your project charter, that is a part of your ending of your initiation phase. No, I think we put that under your, let's go back. Let me make sure where I put it. The project charter we put on the initiation phase, then that's a milestone. That's a deliverable that's completed and it's the ending of a phase. Okay. And then you want to also maybe look at what milestones are you going to have in the future? Well, when you finish initiation, then you're going to start working on your planning activities. Okay. And then you may have an area here for questions or concerns. And then if you've had any issues, as I said, from last week that you want to talk about and think that you need to help get resolved. An example, like we talked about earlier, one of those issues is you don't have people attending meetings and people not implementing their tasks because this is a volunteer project. So that could be an issue that you would need to document and talk about. Well, the truth of the matter is when you're dealing with voluntary work, But you have people that's all a part of the same institution. If you have a project sponsor, someone that's like a project leader or someone that's in charge at the organizational level, such a president or a CEO, well, they could be the reason why that you could put pressure on the people to do their volunteer work, okay? Because it could be a part of what's included in their performance package, okay? So that could be something that you can maybe have happen that you want to identify and talk a little bit more about your project. So again, this is nothing but a template that's in Microsoft Word, and there are various other templates that you can find that will give you examples of project status reports. This is another tool. It was talked about earlier. This is when you want to be able to communicate with the people on the team, as well as communicate with the project sponsor about the status of the project. And this is just a table that you can create, and you can put it in your project charter so that everyone will know this is a method of communication. So one of the communication type in this case is the weekly status reports. The objective of the communication, you want to report the status and any issues and concerns. Its frequency is every week. Who's the audience? You want to have project team members, so everyone that's a part of the team. The owner of it is going to be the project manager or the project lead, and then the deliverable format in this case will be by email. So again, you could talk about other type of documents that you would need to communicate other than the weekly status reports, and then list how's it going to be delivered, you know, who's the owner of it and who's the audience. So that's another tool, communication plan. Okay, and then here are the list of references that I kind of talked about throughout this presentation. And so now at this point, let's just open it up for questions and answers. And again, this is just a snapshot. I feel like a snapshot that talks about projects, project management, and some tools. There are many more tools that I did not share with you today, but these are foundational tools that I consider foundation to help you as you go through the phases of a project: initiation, planning, execution, monitoring, control, and closing. So I want to thank you all for your time, and now I'm available for questions and answers.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Carden, for the presentation. So now we'll go over to our Q&A for this webinar.
Okay.
So there are some questions left in the chat, so I'll read them over and have you answer them. So the first one is, how do you quantify the risk involved?
So that's a very good question. So what you want to do at the very beginning of a project, we have what's a part of PMBOK called the risk management methodology. And it's where you first have to go in, you have to identify what are your risks. Okay, one of the risks that we talked about is that we have resources, but they're volunteer resources in our sustainability project. So it's a risk that they may not come to meetings and implement their task on time. Okay, so the first thing is you've identified that. Okay, then what you want to do is go through and start thinking about the risk assessment, and that's what you're talking about. First thing is, one of the ways to look at it is, how likely do you think that this, since this is a volunteer project, that these resources will probably not attend meetings on time and may not do their task? We categorize them as high, medium, and low. So what are the chances that that'll probably happen? Well, in this particular case, since it's a volunteer project, I would say it's a high probability that it probably will happen. And if it happens, then your next form of assessment is to look at what's the impact to your project. Okay, so say, for example, we had 10 people on the project, and of those 10, 6 of them we've identified probably as a risk. They're not going to attend meetings and not going to implement their project. Well, if you have that many, and you also say it's a high probability of this occurring, then the impact to it, if it does occur, is probably going to be high, which means there may be a delay in you being able to implement this project. Okay, so you look at it from your assessment method is the probability that this will occur, and then what's the impact to your project. Thereafter, once you make the assessment, then you go into a phase of starting to think about, then how should I plan for this risk if it occurs. My recommendation for most risks when you start thinking about how's it going to impact your project is look at how's it going to impact your project schedule, your project plan. And in most cases, it will be either the project's going to be extended for a period of time, right? If the resources are not doing their activities, or you can look at, is it possible for you to get more resources to come on your project to implement the task that these other people did not do? So you're moving from identification to assessment to responding to the risk. Okay? That answer your question? Do you have any follow-up questions?
Yes. So there's another question left in the chat. So what are the common challenges in project management and when dealing with teams with members situated in different geographical locations, especially internationally? And are there any ways that we could prevent this from happening?
Well, first of all, the challenge is, as you said, that is a challenge if you're not in the same space. And then some of the historical aspects of project management, like in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, and even in the 90s, we didn't have these tools such as Zoom, such as Microsoft Teams, that can help us come together in a virtual space. Okay. So that's the first thing. The challenge could be we're not in the same place. And so how are you going to communicate and be able to share information? Well, we're at such an age now where we can pick these tools where we can share information and come together. For example, I'm in Houston, Texas, and I think you guys could, I don't know if you're in Kansas or you're at various other locations, but you all have come together and we've all been a part of a common meeting space. Okay. Now, we have the tool. The next thing you need to consider is the resources that are going to help you to use the tool correctly and then to manage the tool as it relates to gathering information and sharing information. And so that can become a challenge. Okay. Let me give you an example. I noticed for the meeting, before we got started in the meeting, and again, I'm trying to see if I see the names. Okay. So I started off communicating with Rania, and she extended this invitation to me. Okay. But then there was a time when Rania handed it off to, I think it was Sarah, who sent me the meeting notice. And then after that, I think, oh, who's the other guy's name? I cannot think of the gentleman's name. I don't see his name up here. Let me see if I can.
Is it Roselle?
Yes, Roselle. He then was also one of the people who talked about the young professionals and communicated. So it's a matter of having someone to be in charge to put these collaborative pieces together and to ensure that they're implemented in the right space at the right time. Okay. So you need the people, you need the platform and the tools, and then you need somebody to help coordinate and monitor and control that those tasks are being conducted in a timely manner. And then if not, we have the status reports where you put it on there and talk about it's a red flag, and you come together as a team then to talk about this is an issue and how can we resolve the issue. Okay, so thank you for the question. Do you have any follow-up questions that's associated with that?
Okay, let me see if I think there's another related one. So sometimes the authority of the project manager and sponsor collide. So how do you deal with this? So this was left in the chat too.
Okay, so the project sponsor, and let's define who a project sponsor it could be. Okay, in our example, the project sponsor was, in that case, was the president. The president is a higher role and authority and responsibility. The president is the one who's ultimately responsible for the people, the money, the budget, and also for the execution of the activities. Okay, so the president ultimately has the authority. The project lead has a role that's less than the authoritative role of the president. And normally the way that works, the project lead has to assume, because they're getting their responsibilities as well as their performance and their pay that's based upon the president. Okay. Now you'll say, well, the project lead knows more about project management and projects probably more than the president. And that could be possible. Okay. But it's left up to the project lead to be able to explain the methodology, explain the resources, explain the tools, and help the president understand when there are times of conflict, okay? But ultimately, the sponsor, the president, is going to have the final decision. Okay? Other questions?
I have one question.
Sure.
Okay. How flexible the project charter should be? Like, how do we ensure that the charter or the initial document evolves with the project? And when is the best time to make updates or changes into it, if there are any changes in the project implementation?
Okay. Okay, now say that again. What's the first part of the question?
Like how flexible the project charter should be. Should it be fixed? Should it be flexible?
Okay.
Like how? Okay.
Good question. Okay, so the project charter, think about the project charter as the final document that you prepare initiation, okay, which then puts you at the be able to start then your planning, okay? So the project charter should be basically fixed before you start the project planning, which is a good question. Now, say you have some changes, and I'm gonna give you an example of a change. Say you have a resource that, which is your project co-lead, who has transitioned, has transferred or resigned from their position and no longer work at the institution. Well, then that's a change that could happen after you sign this static charter, right? So what you do is you can go in and you can do some revisions, but you also need to look at the impact of that change after the charter has been signed off and finalized. Look at what's the impact to the project, okay? And that impact could be humongous, since we know that the project co-lead supports the project lead or the project manager. And so in that instance, then you need to be able to document what's the impact to the project and bring that as a part of in your status report, and bring it up for discussion and see how it needs to be resolved. Well, there's eventually someone's going to have to assume that role. As just then determining, getting with the project sponsor and other people on the team, when will that role be identified, that person within that role be identified. So in sum, the charter should be fixed and signed off before you begin the planning phase, which is the next phase of the project, okay? But in reality, sometimes even though you signed off and it's fixed, you have other changes. And at that point, you have to look and assess what that change is, and then look to see if if it's going to impact the project and how.
I have a follow-up question for that. Since
Sure.
you worked with project management for years now already, what do you think are some of the most common mistakes when drafting a project charter, and how can we avoid those mistakes?
Common mistake is that you've not identified what's in scope and what's out of scope. Okay, so identifying what you're going to accomplish in the project, okay, and then determining what you've identified, if it can be measurable, such as in our example with a sustainable project, we can measure a report being completed, right? We can assess whether we think the report was completed accurately or if there were some mistakes, okay? So it's important to be able to be as detailed as possible. So that's what I say is a common mistake, is that we don't put as much detail in the charter. For example, you need to be able to identify all the members of your team and the need for all of those members for your team in the project charter, because that's where the project sponsor, is going to sign off. And if you haven't identified that you needed somebody, for example, for the sustainability project to actually look at eco foods, then that can be a problem, because you haven't identified that you needed that resource. And so that can impact what you're going to put into the sustainability plan, because you don't have anybody to be a voice to help identify what needs to be done, what needs to be included as it relates to eco-friendly food. Okay. Follow-up questions?
That's my question. I think mentioning that the project charter needs to be very detailed is very, very important, because I've seen a lot of proposals, I've seen a lot of grants, and some of them are super general. And I think the problems comes with that being too general.
You need to be as very detailed and specific as possible. Yes. And especially when it comes to what you're going to include in that. Okay. And what are you not going to include in the project? Okay. So for example, we talked about we're going to have a sustainability plan. We only talked about we're going to identify the plan, right? We didn't say that we're going to execute the plan. So for charter purposes, it's important to say we're only going to develop the plan, okay? And what you may want to do is talk about what you're not going to do, and we're not going to implement the plan within this project, okay? So yes, be as detailed as possible.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Other questions?
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. So
okay.
Another question left here in our chat is, how do we deal with messing up of our own schedule caused by unexpected delays in the results or any conflicts?
How do you deal with your own schedules?
Like if there is an unexpected delay, how do we deal with the schedule and also the conflicts?
Okay, so if you realize that there's going to be an expected delay, such as one of the team members won't complete their task in time. Well, first, when you identify that this is a delay, okay, and then what you want to do is document that in your status report so that everyone on the team will know that this is an issue. Okay. And then you want to come together with everybody on the team to discuss how you're going to resolve that issue. Okay. One of the ways that you can resolve the issue is you can have another resource take over those particular tasks. Okay. Or you can have the resource work with the person that's a part of the delay. Or you can think about, can we add additional resources that's not a part of the team that can help with this as well? Okay. So the main thing about it is, as soon as you know that it's going to be an issue, identify what the issue is, put the issue on your status report, and then come together as a team to talk about resolutions.
So I have a follow-up question on that. So how important it is to always get a consensus decision, like in terms of project management?
Well, it's important that you don't have to get consensus, okay? As a project lead or project co-lead, and as the actual sponsor, okay, you don't have to have consensus on your decisions, but it is important that you allow your team to discuss and identify what are those resolutions. Okay, so have everyone be able to collaborate and share their thoughts and then share their resolution. Now, ultimately, when you come down to the final decision, that's really based upon what the project lead and the project co-lead in conjunction with the project sponsor, what they decide to do. Okay, so it's important that everyone can express their ideas and their thoughts, but it's not important that you actually do and execute the thoughts of others. It's what the project manager, project co-lead, project lead, and their expertise about projects, as well as the sponsor thinks.
Yep. So speaking of team communication, so someone sent me as a direct message for a question. So how do you deal with cultural differences in any of these collaborations?
Well,
Especially global collaborations.
For global collaborations, you may have to consider, for example, if there's a difference in language, a language barrier, or there's a difference with geographical space, then one, you want to get a tool such as Zoom and Microsoft Project. It can be a platform that everyone can access. Okay. Secondly, if it's something that has to do with the language barrier and an understanding, you may have to involve people on the team that can be interpreters that can help them interpret what is being written and what has been said. So that is something that you can manage by putting people on your team to support that barrier and that cultural difference.
Thank you, Dr. Carden. So
You're welcome.
Going forward for a question regarding Microsoft Project, how can Microsoft Project assist in managing project costs, and what techniques can be used within the tool to track budget performance?
So for within the tool, okay, so in our example was a volunteer. So within the tool of Microsoft Project, once you identify that resource, then what you want to do, and first you look at the task. Remember, you had a task. Within that task, such as complete the project charter, you assigned a date range, okay, begin and end date, and then you assigned a resource to do it. Well, what you need to do is, for say example, it's the project lead. You identify how long it's going to take, 16 days, 15 days. One person is going to do it, which is the project lead. And then you assigned a cost, his hourly rate, her hourly rate that is going to take, whether it's $100 or $150. So you take that, say $100 and multiply about how long it takes, says it's 16 days. So that particular task for the cost to be $1,600. And you would be able to, the system will calculate that for you and be able to keep a running total of all the costs that's associated with and the task that's associated with that particular project lead. Okay, so you're going to look at the length of time that's going to take, the dollar amount that's associated with the time it's going to take, whether it's an hourly rate or a weekly rate or whatever rate you're going to use. And then you be able to include and add all of that up by the resources that's going to work on your particular project. So the tool will allow you, once you enter the dates, and once you enter the cost that's associated with that particular task and the number of people, it will calculate what that is for each by task, and then roll all of those up and calculate it as it relates to the entire project. Okay, and then it'll be able to also help you to say, this is how much cost that's been expensed so far, and this is how much that of a budget that we have that's left. Okay, how much of the cost that's left. So all that can be done for you in Microsoft Project.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Carden. So that's
You're
a lot of
welcome.
questions from the audience. So we don't have much time left, so I
Yes.
think I'll go over with the last part of our webinar.
Mhm.
So thank you again, Dr. Carden. Thank you
You're
all for
welcome.
coming to our webinar, to the students and young professionals. Now I'll give it to Roselle for the final words.
Okay, I'm just gonna let Dr. Carden say his final words of wisdom first before I promote our future events. If you have a couple of thoughts, Dr. Carden, final thoughts about this webinar, about that you think are very important to young professionals like us, like please share them.
Well, all I would like to say is I applaud you all. I applaud you all for identifying that it's very important to look at tools and technologies as it relates to project implementation from a global perspective and as well as for a local perspective. So I applaud you all because you're thinking ahead, that the tools that you need to identify, the techniques that you need to use in your methodologies, all important as it relates to having a baseline of understanding about projects. So I thank you all for the opportunity and applaud you all for thinking of knowing the value of considering this type of webinar topic.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Carden, and thank you, Rania, for co-hosting this event with me. Also, thank you for all the participants. I hope you gained a lot of knowledge about project management, because honestly, I don't know anything about project management. I don't know all the steps. I don't know the available resources that there is, and I'm pretty sure that there's also a lot of other resources out there. So you might want to check that. So for just a final advertisement, make sure to register for the final part of our global collaboration series, which is all about building sustainable partnerships for global collaboration. So for this part, we will invite various panelists from different fields to discuss about their experiences in maintaining good collaboration practices and how to make the collaboration sustainable in the long run. So once again, thank you all for coming, and we will see you again next month.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.